We're diving into the 8 essentials you must have in your property development feasibility study. Every property developer's dream is to extract the maximum profit from their site, and a solid feasibility study is the key to unlocking those developer dreams. Whether you are trying to get deeper insights, nail a project's financial viability, or raise funds from your investors, you must have these 8 things in your property development feasibility study, and that's coming up. A feasibility looks into cash flow, the amount of money left after all expenses and costs have been paid, all debt has been paid, all equity has been paid out back to the developer, and how all profit is being distributed. By the end of this video, you will be able to put together not just a feasibility study, but a full project report. So let's dive in. The first thing that you must have in your feasibility study is a detailed property description. And what that includes is your property address, very simple site dimensions, and I'll show you how you can quickly get these, even if you don't have all those details with you. I'll show you how you can do that on Google Maps. You must have your lot number and title details, easement, mortgages, neighborhood description as to what's right next to it, what's behind it, what's in front of it, and things like that. And if you do have a soil report, that actually is really good because that tells what kind of construction is possible there. It's really good for engineering. And in some cases you may not have that, but if you do, I would want to include that in the project in your feasibility report. And zonings and overlays, obviously that is important because without that you don't know what you're allowed to build on the site. So lot number and title details can be easily be found on any title. So for example, this is a title and I've blurred out the details from one of my projects, and all you got to do is pull those titles out from wherever state or wherever it is applicable, and you can find out what the survey plan number is, what the dealing numbers are. You'll be able to get a request number, a reference number, and all those details. It also shows you if there is the property that you're about to buy already has a mortgage on it and who has that mortgage. It gives you details about various easements that the site might have, and that becomes important because you got to build around that and not on that. And then all your rights and reserved by the Crown, which is all your title details as well. So basically you will get a survey plan number, and it usually starts with SP, and it tells you that we are referring to lot number 1, 2, or 3, whatever one is applicable in that subdivision. There's a little trick I want to show you in case you don't have the site dimensions. I don't know, a lot of people know this, but a lot of people still don't know this. But you can use Google Maps. Go into any Google Maps, zoom in into the property. Let's say this is the property that you want to look at. Let's say 217 or whatever that is. Right click there and just go measure distance, and then move that dot as to where you want to start measuring. For example, a site frontage is very important for any developer. So I would want to put that here, and first thing I want to do is measure, okay, what's the site frontage? It's about 17.2 meters. And then I can measure the entire site by quickly just going around. This may not be 100% exact, but it gives you an idea that this total area is about 624 square meter. When you measure it, Google will not be that off that, it's showing an 800 square meter site at 624. So that's not going to happen. Now, this might be a few meters off here and there, but it is pretty accurate for you to ascertain what you can do on the site. So even if I wanted to build something on it, I know that in this area, the coverage is about 50%. That means I'm only allowed to build on 50% of this land. And that gives me a lot of details. And those are the details that you must have in your property description. The second thing that you have to have in your feasibility study is a proposed development description, and you explain what you're going to develop. Let's say it's townhouses or apartments or land subdivision. You got to give those details. And the more details you can include in this, it gives a visual representation of what the project is going to be, especially if you're trying to raise money. People who are investing into your project may not have the same vision as you do, and that basically means that they need to be able to hold their hand and walk through what you are dreaming of developing, or what you plan, or how you envision it, so to speak. So you must have your plans, elevation, perspective, 3D renders, material specification of what you are going to use. Is it going to be brick veneer? Is it going to be concrete? Is it going to be render? What are you going to do there? All those details have to be there. I also include market research in it, which basically means that all the assumptions that I'm making, for example, I'm thinking I should be able to build 4-bedroom townhouses, and I should be able to sell them for X amount in this current market. So I need to be able to back the assumptions that I'm making, in the sense that I've done this research, and in this area for this kind of demographic, these are the 4-bedroom townhouses or 2-bedroom townhouses are in more demand. That is what I mean by the market research. And if you make those assumptions, so that when you present your proposal and say, hey, I'm going with 2-bedroom townhouses or 2-bedroom apartments because this area is more either singles or young couples, and that's the demographic this development is going to suit to or target to, and that's why I'm going there. So you need to be able to back everything that you are making, every assumption that you are making, by those things. You have to address your target audience and the demographics, and you have to do your due diligence as to, what else is involved in this project. The third thing I would include in the project is a project timeline, and I'll tell you why it is important. It is important so that you know exactly when the cash flow requirements come into the project. So for example, let's say you are developing, and when you are developing, you must know as a ballpark. Now you can do this with any Gantt chart. I use my own template, and if you sign up for the feasibility suite, you get a copy of this template to plan your feasibility. So the way this works is that, let me zoom in a little bit. So the way this works is that you basically start with, it'll automatically pick up from the first of the month, and then it just does the things in the background. What you need to do is plan and say, hey, at this stage, I'll just be looking for the sites, and it'll take me 2 months, and it'll show, okay, this is where you're starting. It's going to take you 2 months starting here. If you say initial due diligence on the site might take you another month, and then you can say, okay, let's say you found the site here, but if you want to push this out, what this shows you is a critical path of your project, of how the project is going to unfold, and in what segment or in what month will you be allowed to come up with funds, or you'll be expecting funds to come from the project. So this is the most important aspect of any feasibility, and most applications don't have that, or they don't talk about it, but this is where I would start, because visually I need to be able to plan that, okay, my initial due diligence on a site might take another month, then I'll do a thorough due diligence. And usually what I do here is that I sign a contract with subject to due diligence, and you can negotiate that based on 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever it is. And you can say, okay, this is, instead of 1 month, it's going to take me 30 days of due diligence at this stage. But after the due diligence over, and if everything goes right, that's when the land acquisition would occur. And if my due diligence is finishing on 31st of January, then my land acquisition would probably happen the following month. And that means I need to change that to February. So I'll just select Feb and select 24. And that way I know that, okay, this is where, so the first funds that I'm going to need, major chunk of funds that I'm going to need in my project are going to come here sometime in February 24, based on this timeline. And after that, I'm going to go through the DA process or the permitting process. I'm going to get my development approval, and that might take 9 months. Now, this might take 6 months. We can change that to 6 months. And this might also start, so if I'm finishing everything out, land acquisition in February, within 1 month after that, I would want to start I would be planning. So all that planning would be happening here during the due diligence phase as to what I'll do the following month, because I should already be with the architect to get the permit or get the development approval going in the background. So for example, this is February, let's just say March, and it's going to take me 6 months to get the DA. So that's how I plan, because each of these stages, construction, settlement, sale of units, and if you're going to keep everything and not sell everything, then you would know that, okay, this is when I am going to settle, this is when the construction's happening, then this is going to take me 2 months to settle and close all the sales, and from that point on, I'll be leasing it out for 12 months. So it could be 12 months, it could be 150 months, for example. And then this will go on, for whatever year. So let's say 120 months and let's call it 10 years, for example. So we know that you can plan all of this, and you must plan all of this and have this timeline in your project that gives your investors and stakeholders an overview of when they can expect the project to finish. So that is super important to have in your feasibility study. The fourth thing you need is a property valuation. Now, sometimes you may have this or you may not have it. If you have it and it's done by a professional valuer or a industry professional where the valuation can be taken to a bank, by all means, you must have that included in your feasibility study. If you haven't got that, make sure you have at least a residual land value. And what that tells you is that if you want to make 25% on the development margin side of things, you can afford to pay X amount of money. And what you ideally want to show is that you are buying land for more or less the same price, or more or less the same value, or less than the value that you are paying. Because if you're paying way more than what your residual land value is saying, you're basically giving away a lot more money to the seller, or than you should, based on the highest best use of your development side. Your feasibility study must have a marketing plan in it, because that tells your investors and stakeholders how are you going to sell this project. So, which is the most important thing, because you can't get any money until the project is sold or leased out completely. So your marketing plan should detail exactly how you're gonna sell everything or lease everything. So in your marketing plan, you must include your total marketing budget, what you plan on spending on the promotion of the project, current state of the market, who you're targeting, development positioning, and how you distinguish the development from other developments, pre-sale requirements that the lender might have imposed on you, what you need, when you're going to have those, any marketing material that you might have ready or you plan to include in your marketing. Could be brochures, websites, electronic direct mailouts, hoarding, and different partner channels. These days you can get marketers who specialize in marketing off the plan sales, so that you can reach a certain target, so that your funding can be approved and you can commence construction. Probably the most important thing that you need in order to convince your investors and stakeholders to invest in the project is a risk assessment. And what that does is it helps you to analyze, identify each and every kind of risk that can derail your project, that can cause your project to delay, that can cause your project to not achieve the required return, and so on. First, identify every kind of risk that is available. So the first thing that you should do is identify each one of them. And that would include any kind of external risks, any kind of construction risk that the builder could go bust halfway through. What are you going to do? How are you going to plan it? How are you going to mitigate that risk? Interest rates might go up. How are you going to account for that? Is there any other feasibility that you've done with a higher interest rate to show you, okay, this is your best case scenario and that's your worst case scenario? So those are the things that you must have in your feasibility study. And those risks for each one of them, it could be, a war might break out. That is also risk, and how people react when things like COVID happens. So you should have that in your feasibility study, that, okay, if this happens, this is what we need to do, and this is our worst case scenario, that's our best case scenario. And once you identify each one of those risks, you need to have a plan to mitigate them, to avoid them, to tackle them, or contain them. So this should more be contain would be a much better word to describe them, and an examination of all the associated dangers and examination of available funds to be able to address those risks. So risk assessment must be included into your property development feasibility study. So finally, your feasibility study must include a feasibility study, which is basically a full financial detailed feasibility study that shows you exactly what your project is going to make, different kind of sensitivity analysis to come with it that show different things that might happen to it. What I would usually do is create a copy of the same feasibility and quickly run numbers on different kind of scenarios, different assumptions, and you can do that in the lead developer feasibility suite. And I'll give you an example. This is Smart Feasibility Calculator, and all our summary sheets, that's how they look like, which you can click the link and share it with anybody you wanted to. And that should show what you're buying the land for, the profit you are going to make in the project, the development margin on it, and all the little detail, all the sources of funds, that how much money you are going to need. Now, this is something that I hardly ever see in any feasibility, which is all the sources of funds. That means all the debt, all the equity should always be equal to all the uses of funds, which is all the costs for the project. So if they are not balanced out, that means you are missing out somewhere. And this is where all your homemade feasibility calculator that all the smart folks put together, that's where they haven't accounted for something and they don't know what they've accounted for in that. So it should detail all your sources of funds, where the debt, where all the debt is going to come in, a breakdown of what equity is required at land purchase or construction, different streams of revenue, if it's residential, commercial, or are you going to make anything during the development, which is known as interim income, and all the different development costs, your land acquisition costs, a breakdown of all the development costs, a funding table that shows, who's funding what and what kind of options we are going with, then all the different finance costs breakdown, your GST liability, your development profit, what happens if the costs or the sales assumption that you have made. For example, we have sales here, and if everything is fine, that's what you make. But what happens if your sale assumptions are off? They're off by 4% and 8%. What would happen to your development margin or profit if that was to happen? So this gives me that my best case scenario, if the sales value go up by 8% and my costs go down by 12%, I will end up making 4.3. But on the other hand, if the worst case scenario happens, that means whatever sales assumptions that I've made go down by 8% and the costs go up by 12%, I will only make 200,000. And that gives me a best and the worst case scenario for the project. And we do the same thing for all the development margin on revenue, what your return on equity would fall down to in your worst case scenario and what it would look like in your best case scenario. And we also include a residual land value. That is what you should pay for land based on your target development margin if your worst case scenario was to hit. And then, it shows all the different development margin and the land value based on the breakdown there. But there's a full tutorial that's built into Lead Developer Feasibility Suite for all its applications as you take them on board and you start going through them. So your feasibility study must have links to your feasibility that people can now look at. I mean, printing your feasibility study into a PDF, all these prints are now a thing of the past. Everything is now online. There's got to be a link that you can share with people who are concerned, because everybody needs to have a look at it really quickly on their phones and so on. And PDFs are not quite cutting it these days. And that's why we created shareable links where whoever you share it with can quickly view the full summary of the project that you have shared with them. And the best part is that you can create numerous copies of these with few different clicks and say, hey, this is the feasibility with 5% interest rate, and this is the feasibility with 20% interest rate, and so on. So must have that in your feasibility study. And the last thing that you gotta have in your feasibility study is a developer's profile. That gives confidence to your stakeholders, to your investment, to your investors in you, showing that you do have a track record of completing the projects, delivering them on time. So a past history of the projects that you might have completed. Specialization, for example, do you specialize in land subdivision? Do you specialize in building apartments and townhouses and so on? And what your career has been and your experience in different things, and your education level, where, what is your background, and if your experience outstrips your education, and a lot of people do, where they've got no education but they started at the grassroots level and they build their career from there, then don't talk about education at all. For example, I put things on my website where you can read about my education, my experience, and all the different projects that I've completed so far. So that is important to have in your feasibility study, because that will give your investors and stakeholders a whole lot of different confidence in you that you do have what it takes to deliver the project. If you would like to learn more about feasibilities or property development, sign up for Edge, our members area. It's 100% free to join, and you can post your questions in the discussion section. Click the link in the description and sign up for free today.